Great mathematicians know how to play with numbers. I'm going to show you today the laws that they use in order to make their calculations work. So any law in math is called a property, and we can just count on using it every time, and we know that if we calculate the correct way, our answer should work out. So we are only going to look at the laws for addition and multiplication, and there's 3 of each of them that we're going to look at. But what's great about them is they're all related. So we're going to take a look at the commutative property of addition and the commutative property of multiplication. Notice kind of the same names, they sort of work the same way. We have the associative property of addition and the associative property of multiplication. And we have the identity property of addition and the identity property of multiplication. So that kind of makes it easy. Now, what does it mean? Well, let's start with the first one. Commutative, it has that word commute in it, which means to move. And so really what we're doing is we're moving numbers around to help us see the answer more clearly. So let's take a look at addition. If I have this problem, 26 plus 18, and it's in parentheses, so that means I have to do that first, then plus 34, well, according to order of operations, I should go into my parentheses. But because I am a good mathematician, I take a look at these numbers and I start to see a relationship. And I see a 6 and a 4 makes a 10. And anytime you can make a 10, it makes it easier to calculate. So I actually don't want to do what's in the parentheses first. What I want to do is I want to calculate 26 and 34 together first. I can do it because I can move numbers in addition and it doesn't change the answer. So I'm going to do 26 plus 34, which equals 60. Then 60 is really easy to add the 18 to, and I get 78. Far easier to do in my head. So whenever you're working with addition problems, all you have to do is move the numbers around and you're still guaranteed to get the same answer. That's what the law is. Now the same thing applies with multiplication. I can move numbers around in multiplication and I'm still going to get the same answer. So in multiplication, a lot of times I'm looking for those numbers that have tens in them. And so if I have 15 times negative 9, and notice it's times because there's no operation there, times 2. Well, I could do 15 times negative 9, but that's a lot harder to do in my head. What's easier for me to do is 15 times 2. So I'm going to move those numbers together. That's the commute part, and I get 30. Now 30 times negative 9 is much easier because 3 times 9 is 27. Then all I have to do is add my 0, and a positive times a negative is a negative. So when we're working with the commutative property, we're just moving numbers together so that it's easier for us to calculate in our head. Now the associative property is a bit different. The associative property, we always have at least 3 numbers, and it really is about moving the order of the parentheses. So I never move the numbers themselves. Up in the commutative, I was moving these numbers together. So in the associative, you're not moving numbers. What you're moving the parentheses. And we know we always have to do parentheses first. And again, it's to help us calculate more easily in our head. So if we have the commutative property of addition, and I have 4 plus the quantity 3 plus 9, maybe I don't want to do 3 plus 9 first because that's a little bit harder. What I could do is I could move those parentheses and I could do the 4 plus 3 first. Now notice, the order of the numbers on both parts did not change because in the associative property, we're not moving the numbers, we're just moving those parentheses. Well, now I can see 4 plus 3 is 7, 7 plus 9 is 16. Notice if I had kept the parentheses originally, 3 plus 9 is 12, 12 plus 4 is 16. I get the same answer. So the associative property is, again, a law that's helping us do mental math easier. Same thing applies for multiplication. So again, we're going to have parentheses and we're going to have 3 or more numbers that we're multiplying. And I can move those parentheses, but don't move the numbers themselves. So if I have 4 and 7/10 times 5, then times 2, well, that's kind of hard to do. So what I look at is I like 5 and 2 because that makes 10. And 10 times any decimal is so much easier to do in your head. So I'm going to move those parentheses over, and I'm going to do 5 times 2 first, which is 10. Then 10 times 4 and 7/10 means I'm just going to move my decimal point 1 place. I get 47. So that's the power, especially with decimals. It makes it a lot easier. Look for numbers that can make tens, hundreds, thousands with those decimals, because all we have to do is then move the decimal point. The last one we're talking about are the identity properties, and those properties are about keeping the number's identity. So if I have the identity property of addition, it says, what is the only number I can add to a number that's going to keep its identity? Well, the only number I can add to 7 is 0, if I'm going to keep that identity of 7. So that's all that property talks about. Same thing for multiplication. What is the only number I can multiply by another number and keep that number's identity? Well, I can only multiply 1. So if I had 1,710 and I want to keep the identity of 1,710, then I just multiply it by 1. So those are our laws of addition and multiplication. They help us do mental math, and that's what you should be thinking about as you use these properties. Great mathematicians use them all the time on almost all the problems they have. Good luck. Have some fun.